Millionaire leaves his 3-year-old disabled son in the forest and walks away, 30 years later. The rain poured down like daggers piercing through the cold night. The wind howled relentlessly, whipping against the trees, creating an eerie sound like the wailing of lost souls. Amid the raging storm, a luxurious car sped down the muddy dirt road, leaving deep tire tracks in the wet soil. Mr. Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, his cold gaze reflecting in the rearview mirror. The car rolled through the desolate forest road, carrying a 3-year-old child curled up in the back seat. Samuel, frail and weak, trembled in his thin clothing. He didn't understand what was happening. He only clung tightly to the seat, his large, round eyes filled with fear. "Father! Daddy!" His young voice trembled, quivering like a whisper in the wind. Richard did not respond. He kept his eyes fixed ahead, ignoring the fragile voice behind him. He couldn't allow himself to waver. This had to be done. For the honor of the family, for his own status, Samuel could not exist. The rain grew heavier as the car came to a stop at the edge of the forest. Richard stepped out, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the mud. He took a deep breath, pushing away the emotions threatening to creep into his mind. There was no turning back now. He opened the back door. Samuel looked up, his innocent eyes shining with trust. "Get out of the car." Richard's voice was deep, emotionless. The child hesitated, gripping the seat tightly, an overwhelming sense of unease washing over him. "Daddy, where are we going?" Samuel's voice wavered with fear. Richard didn't answer. He reached down, grasping the small arm, and pulled the boy out of the car. Samuel stumbled, nearly falling, his bare feet touching the cold, wet ground. "Daddy, I'm scared." The boy clung to Richard's hand, his eyes pleading. Richard yanked his hand away, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Stay here." Samuel's eyes widened in confusion. He looked around. Darkness surrounded him, the towering trees loomed overhead, and the wind howled like an invisible predator. The rain poured down, soaking his soft hair. "Daddy, please don't go. I'll be good. I won't bother you anymore," Samuel sobbed, tears mixing with the rain. Richard turned away. He couldn't look into those eyes. "Don't call me Daddy." The words were cold, slicing into the boy's heart like a knife. Samuel froze, his tiny hands still reaching out in desperation. Richard took one last look at the child, then turned and strode toward the car. "Daddy! Don't leave me!" The scream tore through the night. Richard didn't stop. He got into the driver's seat and started the engine. The car roared in the rain like a cold, mechanical beast. Samuel ran to the car, his small hands pounding on the window, clinging to the last shred of hope. "Daddy! Please! I beg you!" Richard stepped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud, flinging dirty water onto the small, fragile body. Samuel fell to the ground, his wide eyes watching as the car disappeared into the rain. He couldn't believe it. His father would come back. His father had to come back for him, right? But the car's headlights had vanished. Silence swallowed the night. Only the sound of raindrops tapping against the cold earth remained. Samuel curled up, hugging his knees, his whole body shivering from the cold. He waited. The rain continued to fall. The wind continued to howl. The darkness remained thick. But no one came back. A 3-year-old child abandoned in the depths of the forest, alone and small, like a fading ember in the raging storm of life. Samuel huddled under a tree, his breath shaky. The rain poured down in torrents, the icy wind lashing against his delicate skin, making him shudder uncontrollably. His tiny hands clutched each other, desperately seeking warmth in the endless darkness. He didn't understand why his father had abandoned him. Was it because he had done something wrong? Or was it because he was a crippled child, unworthy of love? Samuel raised his hand to wipe his tears, but the rain kept falling, washing everything away. He sat there for a long time, his exhausted eyes slowly closing, but every time he dozed off, he jolted awake at the strange sounds echoing from the depths of the forest. The rustling of leaves. The wind whistling through the branches, like an ominous whisper. And, something was moving. Samuel held his breath, his eyes wide open in the darkness. Behind the tree trunks, shadowy figures flickered in and out of sight, and pairs of wild eyes gleamed in the night. His small hands clenched tightly, his tiny body frozen in fear. His stomach growled. Hunger came along with fear. Ever since his father had abandoned him, Samuel hadn't eaten anything. He looked around, desperately searching for something edible. But the night was cold, the forest barren, there was nothing but damp earth and fallen leaves. He took a step forward, his bare feet pressing against broken twigs, sending sharp jolts of pain through his body. He had no idea where he was going, he only knew that if he stayed in one place, he would die. "I have to find food," he mumbled, his voice barely audible against the wind. After stumbling around for a while, Samuel spotted a bush with small, bright red berries. His eyes lit up. Could he eat them? He didn't know. But his stomach ached, and he was too hungry to think. He plucked one berry and brought it to his lips. Sour. His throat tightened at the harsh, acidic taste, but at least it helped dull the hunger. He ate a few more, the bitterness mixing with the sourness, but he didn't dare eat too many. What if they were poisonous? Another icy gust of wind blew through the trees, making him shudder. He needed shelter. Samuel groped his way through the darkness until he found a fallen tree, its trunk creating a small hollow. Crawling inside, he curled up like a frightened animal. His stomach still twisted with hunger, but exhaustion had overtaken everything else. He drifted into sleep. A howl echoed through the forest. Samuel jolted awake, his heart pounding. He listened, his body tensed. It was a wolf. He had never heard a wolf before, but instinct told him it was dangerous. The howls grew closer, accompanied by the soft crunch of paws moving through dried leaves. Samuel held his breath. From the darkness, a pair of golden eyes appeared, glowing like eerie gemstones. A massive gray wolf stood there, just a few steps away. Samuel didn't dare move. The wolf stared at him, its head lowered slightly, its heavy breaths bogging the cold air. Its ears perked up, listening for the slightest movement. Another howl rang out. The wolf flinched and turned its head toward the deeper part of the forest. After a moment of hesitation, it let out a low growl and vanished into the night. Samuel remained motionless. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his small hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had almost died. For the first time in his life, he had felt death looming so close. Tears welled in his eyes, but he bit his lip to keep from crying out loud. He couldn't be weak. He had to survive. No matter what. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, its pale light unable to chase away the lingering cold from last night's rain. Samuel opened his eyes, his entire body stiff, his clothes soaked and caked in mud. His stomach twisted in agony, his throat parched, and every movement sent a sharp, stabbing pain through his limbs. The boy dragged himself past fallen tree trunks, his dull eyes searching for anything edible. But the wild forest was no place for the weak. There was no food, no clean water. He was exhausted, drained. He had no idea how long he had been walking, only that his tiny feet were now bleeding from stepping on sharp stones. If this continues, I'll die. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed in the distance. The rhythmic pounding of hooves on the dirt road. Samuel looked up. Ahead of him, a horse-drawn cart was approaching. The driver was a middle-aged man with messy black curls, a scruffy beard, and piercing eyes hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Daniel. He was a drifter, making a living through black market dealings and underground trades. But today, he wore the disguise of a kind-hearted man. He pulled the reins, bringing the horse to a halt right in front of Samuel. Seeing the small, frail, filthy child in the middle of the woods, Daniel frowned. "Well, well, a lost little boy in the forest," he said, his voice dripping with concern. "Hey, kiddo, what are you doing out here?" Samuel lifted his hollow eyes to look at him. He had no strength left to speak, only able to part his lips in silent desperation. Daniel jumped down from the cart, stepping closer and crouching to examine him. He saw the scratches covering the boy's body, the bare feet smeared with blood. "My God, who would leave a child wandering in a place like this?" he muttered, shaking his head, sighing with feigned sympathy. "Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you." Samuel didn't know what to do. He was too weak to run, too drained to resist. Daniel reached out, gently patting his head. "Are you hungry?" At the mere mention of the word, hungry, Samuel's stomach let out a loud, pitiful growl. Daniel chuckled. "Come on, hop in. I'll take you to the village. There's food and water there." Samuel hesitated. He remembered how his father had once promised to take him to a better place. But instead, he had abandoned him. Was this man the same? Then a sharp pain twisted through his stomach, leaving him unable to think anymore. Slowly, he gave a small nod. Daniel smiled and lifted the boy into the cart. He didn't know why a child was wandering the forest alone, but he did know one thing: children like this, no one came looking for them. And that meant, they were the perfect prey. Willow Creek was a small village at the edge of the forest. The houses were worn down and crowded together, the dirt roads filled with thick mud, and the villagers wore grim, lifeless expressions. Daniel took Samuel to his home, a small wooden cabin at the far end of the village. He placed an old loaf of bread and a cup of water in front of the boy. "So, kid, can you tell me your name?" Samuel took the bread but didn't eat it right away. He stared at Daniel, his eyes still filled with suspicion. Noticing this, Daniel laughed. "You can trust me. I won't hurt you." Samuel remained silent. But hunger had already won over fear. He took a bite, chewing so fast that he nearly choked. Daniel watched him closely, the corner of his lips curling upward. "Do you have a home?" he asked. Samuel froze. Did he have a home? The answer was too obvious. "No," he whispered. Daniel let out a long sigh. "Such a shame. Well then, would you like to stay here with me?" Samuel looked at him. "If you stay here, you'll have a bed, food to eat. I'll teach you how to work, how to make a living," Daniel said, his voice smooth, coaxing. The boy remained quiet. He had no idea that, from this moment on, his life had fallen into another trap. A trap far more terrifying than the wild forest. During his first days at Daniel's house, Samuel thought he had finally found a place to belong. At the very least, he no longer had to wander the forest, no longer had to endure long, freezing nights without food. Daniel had given him a roof over his head, bread, and water. But then, he realized that things weren't as they seemed. Daniel was not a kind man. He was a smuggler, making his living through dirty deals in the shadows. He hadn't saved Samuel out of compassion, he had only seen a child no one cared about, a tool he could exploit. And he had begun to use him. Early in the morning, Daniel tossed an old sack at Samuel. "Go to the market, kid. Beg for money." Samuel stared at him with wide eyes. "I beg?" Daniel nodded, biting into a piece of bread as he lounged with one leg crossed over the other. "People pity children more than adults. All you have to do is look pathetic, cry a little, and the money will come." Samuel clutched the sack tightly but said nothing. Daniel didn't give him a choice. If he refused, he wouldn't get food. And so, for the first time in his life, Samuel stepped onto the streets, blending into the crowd of strangers. Willow Creek Market was a chaotic place. Stalls displayed everything: fruits, meat, fish, and second-hand clothes. The smell of rotten fish mixed with the scent of freshly baked bread, forming an overwhelming stench. Samuel walked along the muddy paths, his wide eyes observing the passing people. He didn't know what to do. Should he sit down and cry? Should he grab someone's sleeve and beg them to help him? He only knew one thing: he was starving. His stomach twisted painfully as he spotted a vendor grilling meat over a charcoal fire. The delicious aroma was unbearable. Slowly, he approached, his small hands gripping the hem of his tattered shirt. The vendor, a plump woman with sharp, hawk-like eyes, glared at him. "What do you want?" she asked gruffly. Samuel swallowed dryly. Can I have some food?" The woman laughed. "Got money?" Samuel shook his head. Her face immediately darkened. "No money, no food. Get lost." Samuel stepped back, but before he could move away, a rough hand grabbed his shoulder. "Whose brat are you? Why are you wandering around here?" It was another man, likely a stall owner nearby. He eyed Samuel with disgust. "Who are you? A thief?" "No. I'm not." Samuel shook his head, struggling to break free. But the man's grip tightened. "Street rats like you are nothing but filth. I've seen plenty of your kind. I should take you to the guards." The moment he heard "guards," Samuel panicked. He thrashed, but the man was too strong. Just then, a group of children ran over. They were around 8 or 9 years old, dressed in ragged clothes, their eyes filled with mischief. One of them sneered. "Look at that, some filthy little rat. Must be a bastard someone threw away. Where'd you come from, freak?" The kids burst into laughter, shoving Samuel to the ground. Mud splattered across his face. He looked up, his eyes burning with shame. Why did they hate him? What had he done wrong? A rock flew through the air, striking his shoulder hard. "Get lost, cursed brat. Go die somewhere else." Another rock hit his leg. Samuel curled up, covering his head as the laughter around him pierced through him like knives. But he didn't cry. He only clenched his fists. And in that moment, a single thought flashed through his mind. "I hate all of them." The luxurious mansion of Mr. Richard stood atop a hill overlooking the city, a symbol of power and wealth. Pristine white walls, towering columns, and an expansive, meticulously trimmed garden adorned the estate. But behind that perfection lay a secret no one knew. Richard had not slept peacefully since the night he abandoned Samuel. Tonight, the rain fell once more. Richard sat alone in his study, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. He leaned back in his chair, staring into the flickering flames in the fireplace, yet his mind drifted to a place far beyond. He had done the right thing. He knew he had no other choice. A crippled son would be a stain on the family name. The boy could never attend lavish high society parties, never inherit the family empire, never bring honor to the lineage. He had to choose. And he had chosen correctly. But the child's cries still echoed in his mind. "Father! Please, Father!" He shut his eyes tightly, gripping the glass in his hand. Hallucinations. It was just a hallucination. He had tried to forget, but the more he tried, the more it haunted him. He stood up, poured himself another glass, and stepped out onto the balcony. The cold wind rushed past, carrying the damp scent of rain and earth. Below, the city sprawled with thousands of lives carrying on, lives unburdened by the past. Suddenly, a shiver ran down his spine. He felt someone watching him. Richard whipped around. No one was there. He shook his head and scoffed at himself. "You're being paranoid, Richard." He stepped back inside and shut the balcony doors. But the moment he turned around, an image flashed in the mirror. A child. Standing in the rain. Soaking wet black hair, wide eyes staring at him. Richard froze. His breathing grew heavy. He turned around. Nothing. Only his own pale face staring back at him in the mirror. He wiped his forehead, feeling the cold sweat trickling down his spine. Was he losing his mind? No. Impossible. He just needed sleep. But as Richard lay down, the nightmare came for him again. He found himself standing in a dense forest. The rain poured heavily, towering trees loomed above, and shadowy figures flickered through the mist. A distant cry echoed. He stepped forward, and before him, a small child crouched on the muddy ground. Samuel. But not the frail boy he had abandoned. The child's face was ghostly pale, his dark eyes deep and endless, like two bottomless pits. His lips curled slightly, almost into a smile, but it was not the smile of a child. Richard stumbled back, his heart pounding. Samuel. He whispered. The child did not answer. He stood up, taking slow steps toward him. A small hand reached out, but it was covered in dried blood. Father, the voice rang out, soft but chilling to the bone. Richard shook his head, stepping back. You don't exist, he whispered. But Samuel kept walking forward. Father, why did you abandon me? Shut up. Richard shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of the rain. Samuel stopped. A ghostly smile appeared on his young face. You will be abandoned too. Then the boy vanished into the darkness. Richard jolted awake, his breath ragged. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead. He raised a hand to his temple, trying to calm himself. Just a dream. It was just a dream. But when he turned to look at the mirror on the wall, his heart nearly stopped. Because on the fogged-up glass, someone had written a sentence. You will be abandoned too. Time passed, and Samuel was no longer the weak child who had been stoned and ridiculed. He had learned how to survive. How to endure. And most importantly, he had learned that in this world, only the strong were not trampled on. Daniel was neither a father nor a mentor. He was just a man who exploited everything for his own gain. And Samuel? He was just another pawn sacrificed in Daniel's dirty games. Hurry up, kid. I don't have all night. Daniel snapped. Samuel, now 18, lowered his head and clenched the torn bag in his hands. He took a deep breath before silently slipping through the crowd, heading toward the market stalls at the night bazaar. He no longer begged for food. Street kids had two choices: be exploited or learn to steal to survive. Samuel had chosen the latter. He weaved through the stalls, silently maneuvering through the crowd. His sharp eyes scanned the food vendors, searching for the easiest target. A bread seller was busy talking to a customer. He moved in. His small hand swept through the air like a shadow, snatching a loaf of bread and tucking it into his coat pocket. No one noticed. He turned, ready to leave when, you. Stop right there. His heart stopped. The vendor had seen him. The man shouted and grabbed his arm. What the hell are you doing? Stealing. Samuel struggled, but the man's rough hand gripped him tightly. Everyone. Look. This little brat is stealing. Judgmental stares bore down on him. Some people sneered, others just shook their heads in disdain. Who are you? Whose kid are you? The vendor demanded. No one's, Samuel murmured. The man scoffed. A worthless street rat, huh? I'll teach you a lesson. He raised his hand. Smack. The slap landed hard on Samuel's face. His skin burned, his ears rang, but he did not cry. A normal child would scream. A normal child would beg. But Samuel was no longer a normal child. He only clenched his fists. And in that moment, something inside him shattered. No more fear. No more tears. Only hatred remained. That night, when Samuel returned home with a bruise on his face, he said nothing. Daniel looked at him and laughed. First time getting hit? Welcome to the real world, kid. Samuel didn't respond. He just stood there, his eyes darkening. Daniel noticed. He smirked and patted the boy's shoulder. Don't worry. One day, you'll be stronger than them. And when that day comes, no one will be able to touch you. From that day forward, Samuel changed. He was no longer a passive boy. He learned how to hide better, how to strike faster, how to see the weaknesses of others. He became a skilled thief. Daniel was pleased. Samuel was an excellent tool. But he didn't realize that Samuel was no longer his pawn. Inside the boy, a demon had awakened. And that demon was waiting for the right moment to rise. Time passed. Samuel was no longer the trembling child caught in the rain that night. He had grown into a 14-year-old teenager, taller, stronger, faster. But more than anything, he had become someone who understood how the world truly worked. To Daniel, he was just a useful tool, a sharp knife that could slip through the shadows without leaving a trace. But in Samuel's heart, he had been silently nurturing a bigger plan. And that plan started with a name, Mr. Richard. I've got a big job. Daniel sat on a wooden chair, a half-smoked cigar between his fingers. Samuel stood before him, his face emotionless. Some rich old man is looking for someone to steal important documents from a government building. If we pull it off, we'll make a fortune. Daniel narrowed his eyes, watching Samuel's reaction. I want you to do it. Samuel tilted his head slightly. A job this big, why not give it to the older guys? Aren't I just a kid? Daniel chuckled. Kid, you're not that weak little brat anymore. I see potential in you. He exhaled a stream of smoke, his voice lowering. If you pull this off, I'll give you a big cut. Samuel nodded. He wasn't interested in Daniel's money. But this heist might be the first step toward getting close to Richard. Late at night. Samuel moved silently across the rooftops, his footsteps as light as a stray cat's. He had planned everything meticulously, the security system, the guards' patrol schedule, the escape routes. He left no trace behind. His fingers brushed over the lock. A soft click echoed in the quiet night. The door creaked open. He slipped into the office of a high-ranking official. A large safe sat in the middle of the room. He knelt down, carefully turning the lock's dial. A series of faint clacks broke the silence. Then, he stopped. His eyes locked onto a file sitting on the desk. Richard Garcia. He froze. That man was involved in this. Samuel opened the file, his eyes scanning the words inside. Richard wasn't just a millionaire. He was tangled in underground dealings, tax evasion, money laundering, bribing officials. He hadn't just abandoned Samuel. He was a monster lurking in the shadows. Samuel clenched the file tightly, his breathing unsteady. This was his chance. He took every document related to Richard, then disappeared into the night without making a sound. The next morning, Daniel stared at the stack of documents Samuel had brought back. Where did you find this? He raised an eyebrow. Samuel crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. In the safe. Daniel whistled. Richard Garcia. I didn't expect him to be involved in this kind of business. He looked up at Samuel. What do you want? A reward? Samuel shook his head. I want to end him myself. Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then, he laughed. Kid, I like your attitude. He took a drag from his cigarette, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. But Richard isn't easy to take down. He has money, power, and people protecting him. Samuel didn't respond. He already knew that. I can help you, Daniel continued. But you have to give me a reason. Samuel clenched his fists. He's my father. This time, Daniel didn't laugh. He looked at Samuel, his expression unreadable. So that's how it is. He nodded slowly. You want revenge? Fine. But don't let emotions get in the way. Revenge isn't for the weak. Samuel said nothing. But inside him, his hatred burned fiercer than ever. He had been waiting for this day for 11 years. And now, everything was only just beginning. The night rain poured down over the city, heavy droplets pounding against rooftops, streets, washing away the dirt and the false sense of peace that cloaked this place. Samuel stood on the rooftop of an old building, his gaze fixed on the distant main road. A convoy of luxury cars was making its way up the hill, toward the grand estate where Richard continued to live in wealth and comfort. He had no idea that a demon was closing in on him. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, faded photograph, the only one he had left of himself at 3 years old. In the picture, a tiny boy was smiling innocently, unaware that just days later, his own father would abandon him in the middle of a raging storm. Samuel tightened his grip on the photograph. It was time. The next morning, Richard stepped down the grand staircase with a weary expression. He hadn't slept well for months. Nightmares haunted him every time he closed his eyes. As he entered his office, something unusual caught his eye. On the desk, there was a black envelope. He frowned. He didn't recall ordering anyone to bring it in. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a photograph. An old picture, of Samuel. Richard's heart nearly stopped. On the back of the photo, there was a message written in red ink. The best father in the world. A chill ran down his spine. His eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner as if someone were hiding in the shadows. But there was nothing. Only a suffocating silence. He slammed the photo onto the desk, his breath unsteady. No. It wasn't possible. Samuel was dead. He had abandoned that kid in the middle of the deep forest 11 years ago. There was no way he was still alive. No way. Richard grabbed his phone, quickly dialing one of his most trusted bodyguards. Henry, I want you to check the security in this house immediately. Who the hell put that envelope in my office? The other end of the line was silent for a few seconds. Then, Henry's voice came through, sounding uncertain. Mr. Richard, no one delivered a letter to your office. Richard felt the blood in his veins turn colder than ice. He was being watched. At that moment, Samuel was sitting in a small bar, his quiet eyes observing the people coming and going. He knew Richard would panic. He would try to tighten security. But that didn't matter. Richard was a man who had lived in luxury his whole life. He wasn't used to dealing with the darkness. Samuel was. Samuel. A voice cut through his thoughts. He looked up. It was Daniel. The man pulled out a chair and sat down, tossing a piece of paper onto the table. Samuel picked it up and read it, a list of Richard's bodyguards, along with details of his schedule. Everything you need is here. I've got someone inside his house. Daniel smirked. But I have to ask you one more time, do you really want to kill him? Samuel didn't answer immediately. Kill him? For years, he had dreamed of this moment. He had imagined thousands of ways to take revenge, to strangle him until he stopped breathing, to drive a knife into his heart, or to let him experience the agony of being abandoned in the darkness, just as he had done to Samuel. But would killing him truly bring peace? Samuel placed the paper back on the table. Not yet, he said slowly. Daniel narrowed his eyes. You want to toy with him first. Samuel smirked, a cold smile. He killed me once. Now it's my turn to let him know what that feels like. Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then, he laughed. Kid, I'm starting to like you. Samuel returned to his hideout, a long-abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The walls were covered with photographs. Richard. The people who had mocked him. The ones who had crushed him under their feet. They would all pay. Standing in the middle of those images, Samuel quietly lit a candle. The flickering flame reflected in his eyes. The hunt had begun. The rain still fell, but this time, it was no longer the lifeless drizzle of the past. It was the sign of an approaching storm. And Samuel was the storm. From his hideout, he looked down at the city. Richard was still living in his lavish mansion, completely unaware that his final days were approaching. But Samuel wouldn't kill him yet. Not yet. He needed to suffer first. To feel fear. To experience helplessness. Just as Samuel had once felt. And the first step was to destroy everything Richard had. Richard sat in his luxurious office, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand. But his mind was in chaos. The mysterious letter. The photograph of Samuel. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. Mr. Richard, there's a problem. Henry, his most trusted bodyguard, stepped in, his face grim. Richard set his glass down. Speak. Henry placed a stack of documents on the table. The cash vault at your southern factory has burned down. Richard jolted. What? He grabbed the documents and flipped through the photos of the scene. The entire warehouse, where he had stored millions of pesos in cash for money laundering, had burned to ashes. The police say there are signs of arson, Henry continued. But no one knows who the culprit is. Richard clenched the documents tightly. There was no way this was a coincidence. He narrowed his eyes. Check all the security cameras. Henry followed the order. He went through every recording, but most of the cameras around the vault had been disabled. However, there was one striking detail. A figure appeared in the night. The face was unclear. No traces were left behind. But before vanishing from the camera's view, the person had left behind a single letter, painted in red on the vault's door. An S. S. Richard stared at the screen. He didn't need anyone to tell him what that letter meant. Samuel. That night, Richard sat alone in his office, surrounded by darkness. He had already ordered security to be reinforced, but he knew it wouldn't stop whatever was coming. The phone rang. An unknown number. Richard picked up, his voice lowering. Who is this? A long silence. Then, a voice spoke. A deep, slow voice, chillingly familiar. Father. Richard froze. The phone screen displayed no number. As if the call had come from nowhere. Who is this? His voice was hoarse. A quiet chuckle echoed through the receiver. Cold. Void of warmth. Don't you recognize me, Father? Richard gripped the phone tightly. Who the hell are you? Samuel. His heart stopped. Impossible. He forced himself to stay calm, gritting his teeth. You're dead. The other end of the line was silent for a few seconds. Then Samuel spoke, his voice light but laced with a chilling menace. Then, who is talking to you right now? Richard felt his entire body tremble. His grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. He shot up from his chair and looked out the window. The city was cloaked in darkness. But in the distance, through the rain, a lone figure stood silently, staring up at his mansion. The face was obscured. But Richard knew, he was being watched. He hung up, his heart pounding violently against his ribs. Henry burst into the room. Mr. Richard, what happened? Richard gasped for breath. Increase security. Immediately. Henry frowned. What are you afraid of? Richard looked out the window once more. But the figure was gone. He muttered under his breath. He's back. Samuel looked up at the grand mansion. He had received the message. He knew the storm was coming. But this was just the beginning. He didn't want Richard to die right away. He needed to suffer. He needed to lose everything before he could truly understand what it felt like to be abandoned in the darkness. Samuel turned away and stepped into the rain. The storm of revenge had officially begun. Richard sat alone in the vast room, gripping a glass of liquor tightly in his hand. The darkness in the room was barely pushed back by the dim glow of the desk lamp. He had locked himself in here all day, his mind weighed down by what had just happened. A son was dead. Or rather, he believed he was. Now, Samuel seemed to have become a ghost haunting him. He no longer knew how to distinguish between reality and hallucination. Henry had reinforced security around the mansion, but Richard didn't feel any safer. The unease clung to him like an invisible hand tightening around his throat every time night fell. He couldn't escape the voice echoing in his mind. Father. Please, Father. Richard hurled the glass to the floor. The glass shattered, liquor spilling out, mixing with the dim light on the wooden floor. He roared, as if trying to drive away that desperate cry, but it only echoed louder. Sir. Henry rushed in, his face filled with worry. Mr. Richard, what happened? Richard gasped for breath, his whole body trembling. Nothing, nothing. Just leave me alone. Henry hesitated, then nodded and stepped back, leaving Richard to drown in his own panic. A week later, Richard received news that one of his factories on the outskirts had been vandalized. All the goods, worth millions of pesos, had either been stolen or destroyed. He sat in the conference room with his advisors and guards, his voice low and filled with rage. Who did this? Do we have any enemies out there that I don't know about? Henry exchanged looks with one of the advisors before speaking slowly. Mr. Richard, we couldn't find any traces of the attackers. But, there was something strange. Richard frowned. Speak. In one corner of the factory, we found the letter S painted in red. The conference room fell into silence. Richard shot to his feet, his gaze turning ice cold. Him again. Richard could no longer eat well or sleep peacefully. Every night, he felt as if someone was standing outside his bedroom door, staring at him through the gap. Once, he opened the door, but the hallway was empty. He ordered Henry to install more cameras all over the mansion. But when he checked the footage, there was nothing. Everything looked perfectly normal. Except for one time, on a recording from the main entrance, there was a shadow. A blurry figure passing by, leaving only a faint trace on the screen. Richard stared at the monitor, his heart tightening. Samuel was no longer a boy. He had grown. He had become stronger. And now, he was a ghost that no one could touch. One morning, Richard woke up to find a letter placed on his bed. He had no idea how someone had entered his room, but the letter certainly wasn't from any of his staff. He opened it, and the words inside made him freeze. Father, be ready. Richard collapsed onto the bed, his entire body trembling. He had lost everything he once thought was untouchable, his peace, his sense of security, and his dignity. Now, only one question remained. What did Samuel want? Samuel stood beneath the shadow of a tall building, his eyes fixed on the luxurious mansion atop the hill. He knew Richard was afraid, that he was losing his confidence. But this was only the beginning. Richard needed to experience everything Samuel had endured. He wasn't in a hurry. He would make him feel it, little by little, second by second, until he had no strength left to resist. Samuel closed his eyes, feeling the icy rain on his face. He had waited his whole life for this moment. Richard was no longer a man of power. Tonight, as he stood before the mirror in his bedroom, he saw a different man, older, weaker, and filled with fear. His hair had turned white, his eyes were sunken and trembling. He picked up a comb, but his hand shook uncontrollably, causing it to slip and fall to the floor. He bent down to pick it up, but his own reflection in the mirror froze him in place. A shadow stood behind him. Richard spun around. No one was there. He gasped, cold sweat trickling down his temple. Another hallucination. Or, was it? He no longer knew if he was sane. The shadows, the footsteps, the news of repeated acts of sabotage targeting his properties, everything was driving him mad. And tonight, he knew the ghosts of the past would not let him rest. In the basement of the mansion, a team of highly paid mercenaries sat waiting. They didn't care about Richard's fear. Their job was to protect him, and they were ready to do whatever it took. Richard descended the stairs, his gaze sweeping over their cold, hardened faces. I want all of you to stay on high alert. No one sleeps tonight. The team leader, a massive man with a stone-like expression, nodded. We've installed motion sensors at every entrance. No one can get in without being detected. Richard nodded back, but deep down, he felt no reassurance. He no longer trusted anyone, not even the men he had paid. On the hill, Samuel sat silently beneath a large tree. From there, he could see the lights of Richard's mansion. The silhouettes of guards flickered past the windows. They were preparing for him. But Samuel was in no rush. He knew how to wait. To wait until the darkness settled in, until the guards grew tired, until their overconfidence made them careless. From his coat pocket, he pulled out a photograph. It was an old picture of Richard, but now, a line of text had been added to it. It's time to pay. Samuel lifted his eyes to the glowing mansion, unblinking. Night fell. The mansion sank into silence. Richard sat in his office, a gun placed right in front of him. His grip tightened on the chair's armrest, his eyes darting around, as if looking away for even a second would allow Samuel to emerge from the darkness. A sound rang out. Richard flinched, grabbing the gun. Who's there? He shouted. No response. He stood up and stepped out of the room. The hallway was empty, the dim yellow light casting eerie shadows on the cold walls. Richard moved forward, gun raised. The noise came again, this time from the staircase leading to the basement. He cautiously approached. He saw his shadow on the wall, and another shadow, standing still behind him. Richard spun around. No one was there. He felt a freezing gust of air brush past his nape. Come out, he shouted, his voice hoarse. I know you're here. He didn't realize that his hands were shaking. Didn't realize that sweat had soaked through his shirt. He only felt one thing, he was being hunted. In the basement, Henry and the guards heard nothing. They thought Richard was only imagining things. But then, a faint noise echoed. The basement door creaked open. A shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. The dim light wasn't enough to reveal the face, but Henry immediately barked an order. Stop! Who are you? The figure didn't respond. Just took another step down. Henry raised his gun. This is your final warning. Stop, or I'll shoot. The figure remained silent, but now, a deep voice emerged from the darkness. Your boss owes me a life. Henry squinted. Samuel. The figure took another step, and the light touched his face. He smiled faintly, a cold, chilling smile. Hello, Henry. It's been a long time. Richard stepped backward, his breaths heavy, as if the air in the room had been drained. In front of him, Samuel stood still, his face frozen like a statue, but his eyes burned with the weight of years of hatred. Samuel, Richard's voice trembled, stripped of the authority he once commanded in the business world. "Father." Samuel's voice was soft but sharp as a blade, cutting through the silence. Richard swallowed hard. The gun in his hand loosened, no longer steady. I don't know what to say." He tried to gather himself, but Samuel gave him no chance. "Don't say anything." Samuel stepped forward, making Richard flinch. "You said enough already. 11 years ago, you said everything you needed to when you left me in the rain." Richard clenched his fists, but the gun still pointed at the floor. He couldn't lift it. "Samuel, listen to me," Richard tried to speak, but Samuel cut him off. "There is nothing you can say that will change anything." Samuel stood so close now that Richard could see every scar on his face, scars he had never known existed. "You abandoned me, left me to fight this cruel world alone. Did you think you could do that without facing consequences?" Richard took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Samuel, I know I was wrong. I know that. But killing me, it won't make you feel any better." Samuel smirked, a cold, merciless smile. "Who said I was going to kill you?" Richard froze. "I don't want you dead. Not yet." Samuel's voice was eerily calm, devoid of emotion. "I want you to feel fear. I want you to live every day the way I did, drowning in darkness, in pain, in loneliness." Richard shook his head, his eyes pleading. "You don't understand, Samuel. I did everything to protect the family, to preserve our honor. I had no other choice." "No other choice?" Samuel scoffed. "You always had a choice. You could have been a real father. But you took the easy way out. You abandoned your own son to protect your hollow sense of honor." Richard was silent. "You thought I was dead, didn't you? You thought I'd disappear and never return." Samuel stepped forward again, forcing Richard back against the wall. "But I survived. And now, I'm here to make sure you understand you can't escape the consequences." Richard felt his legs weaken beneath him. "Samuel, please. I truly regret it." "It's too late," Samuel said, and for a moment, his eyes flickered with a trace of pain. "Your regret can't erase 11 years of being abandoned, tormented, turned into a tool. Your regret can't bring back the childhood I lost." Richard reached out, as if trying to grasp even a shred of compassion from the son he had forsaken. "Let me make it right." Samuel stared at him, saying nothing. Then he turned and walked away. "Samuel!" Richard called after him, his voice echoing through the empty room. Samuel didn't stop. He stepped through the door, his figure disappearing into the darkness. Richard's mansion still stood, but now, it was no longer a fortress of security. It was just an empty house, filled with painful memories and ghosts that would never fade away. Richard collapsed onto the floor, his head bowed low, his hands covering his face. He was no longer a father, no longer a successful businessman. He was just an old man, left behind in the darkness he had created. The storm had passed, but the silence after the storm was even more terrifying. Samuel stood still in a dark alley, the street lamp casting his shadow against the old brick wall. In his hand, a small knife was still stained with blood. He had just finished another fight in the underworld, yet he felt nothing but emptiness. The faces had long faded from his memory, the screams had been silenced long ago. It had been too long since he last felt anything when taking a life. But this time, a small sound made him pause. "Please, help me." A weak voice came from the end of the alley. Samuel turned, his cold eyes narrowing toward the sound. A child, not much younger than he had been back then, lay curled up against the wall, trembling. The boy raised a frail, thin arm. "Please, help me." Samuel stood still, his eyes dark. He had seen this scene hundreds of times before. A weak, useless child abandoned by the world. This boy was no different from how he had been. "Where are the adults?" Samuel asked, his voice low and cold. The boy shook his head, his voice choking. They beat me, they took me. I don't want." Samuel took a deep breath. He should turn and walk away. This wasn't his business. He had survived alone, without anyone's help. He knew that in this life, you could only rely on yourself. But those eyes filled with fear yet holding a fragile glimmer of hope made him hesitate. Would he really let this happen again? Samuel crouched down and lifted the boy with one arm. The child flinched, trembling. Don't hit me." "Shut up," Samuel said, but his voice had lost its cold edge. "Who took you?" The boy looked at him, tears welling up in his eyes. They're a gang, they take kids to do bad things. Please don't let them take me. I'm scared." Samuel sighed, pulling off his jacket and wrapping it around the boy. "Stop talking. I'm getting you out of here." The boy looked at Samuel with eyes full of gratitude, but also a hint of doubt. "Who are you?" Samuel didn't answer. He carried the boy out of the alley and stepped onto a wider street. A question kept repeating in his mind, why am I doing this? The whole night, Samuel took the boy to a small house on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he often used as a hideout after his jobs. He set the child down on the bed, pulling an old blanket over him. But instead of leaving, Samuel sat down on a wooden chair nearby, silently watching the boy sleep. In the dim light of the oil lamp, Samuel found himself remembering the days that had passed. You were once a child abandoned, beaten, forced to do terrible things just to survive. You had looked into the faces of adults and seen only indifference, contempt, and apathy. And yet, here you were, doing something no one had ever done for you, offering a bit of kindness. When morning came, the boy woke up, his eyes swollen from crying. Samuel handed him a dry piece of bread and a glass of water. "Eat." The boy took it hesitantly. "Thank you, sir." Samuel didn't respond. He just sat still, watching as the boy ate, bite by bite. "You're not going to make me do anything, are you?" the boy asked, his voice full of worry. Samuel frowned. "I'm not like them." The boy lowered his head. "I'm sorry. I don't know who to trust anymore." Samuel remained silent. He understood that feeling. Living in darkness for too long, to the point where you couldn't tell light from shadow. A thought flickered in his mind. This boy didn't deserve to be abandoned. And if Samuel could save one child, maybe he could save himself too. When the boy finished eating, Samuel stood up, tucking his small knife into his belt. "Come on. I'm taking you somewhere safe." The boy looked at him, his eyes filled with hope. "Really, really?" Samuel nodded. "I promise." And for the first time in years, Samuel realized that, deep inside him, a tiny light had begun to flicker. Samuel and the boy walked through the quiet streets, the glow of streetlights casting their shadows onto the damp pavement. It was still early, and the city had yet to wake. The soft clicking of Samuel's boots echoed through the empty roads, while the boy followed in silence, occasionally glancing up at the man who had saved him. "Where are we going?" the boy asked softly. "Somewhere safe," Samuel replied without turning back. "And what about you?" the boy spoke again after a long pause. Samuel stopped walking and turned to look at him. His gaze was contemplative, as if carefully choosing his words. "I have things to do." The boy didn't ask further. There was something in Samuel's voice that made him understand the man walking beside him wasn't just leading the way. He was searching for his own path, though he never said it out loud. Samuel took the boy to a small orphanage on the outskirts of the city. A middle-aged woman with a kind face greeted them at the door. "Hello, Miss Anna," Samuel said quietly. Anna's eyes widened in surprise. Samuel. It's been so long. But why? She glanced at the boy, then back at Samuel. Is this? He needs a safe place, Samuel explained. Can you take care of him? Anna nodded, offering a gentle smile to the boy. Of course. Come inside, sweetheart, I'll take care of you. The boy looked up at Samuel one last time, gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you. You never told me your name. Samuel dipped his head slightly. Just call me Samuel. The boy gave a small nod. Thank you, Samuel. As the orphanage door closed, Samuel stood there for a long time. The wind blew past, making his long coat flutter. He didn't know what had compelled him to bring the boy here. He only knew that, for the first time in years, he felt like he had done something right. But Samuel's life couldn't change so easily because of one action. He was still haunted by ghosts, hunted by enemies in the shadows, and burdened by a fire of vengeance that had never been extinguished. Daniel was still the biggest shadow in his life, the one who had once taught him how to survive in this harsh world, but also the one who had turned him into a tool. Daniel had to pay. And so did all those who had looked down on him, tormented him when he was just a forsaken child. Samuel returned to the city as the sky brightened. He made his way to a small bar, the place where Daniel was known to frequent. Daniel was sitting at a corner table, laughing and chatting with a group of men. But the moment Samuel stepped inside, his gaze immediately landed on him. Samuel. Daniel called out, his voice louder than usual. It's been a while. You doing okay? Samuel walked over and pulled out a chair, sitting down across from Daniel. His expression betrayed no emotion. I'm still alive, Samuel replied curtly. Daniel leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. I heard you've been running your own business. Leaving me without a word, not even a goodbye. That's disappointing. Disappointing? Samuel let out a cold chuckle. I learned how to survive from you, how to endure. Now, I don't need you anymore. Daniel burst into laughter. That's my boy. I taught you how to live, and now you turn your back on me. But it's fine. I knew this day would come. Samuel leaned in slightly, his voice quiet but laced with menace. Then you must also know what's coming, don't you? Daniel stopped laughing. His eyes grew sharp. You think you can take me on? Samuel stood up, bending down just enough to whisper into Daniel's ear. I'm not just taking you on. I'm ending you. Daniel remained still, his face slowly tensing. Samuel turned away, leaving behind a heavy silence in the bar. As he stepped outside, the morning sunlight began to push away the darkness. But within him, the darkness remained. The only difference was that now, he had a new purpose. He didn't just want revenge. He wanted change. And to change, he had to face every person who had wronged him, who had hurt him. He needed to end his story in a different way. Rain drizzled over the old rooftops, creating a rhythmic tapping sound. Samuel stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building, his eyes fixed on the street below. Daniel was leaving the bar, his posture relaxed, as if he was still the untouchable king of the underworld. Samuel narrowed his eyes. He doesn't know this is his last night. Daniel walked into a dark alley, where the streetlights couldn't reach. He had no idea that Samuel had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Daniel. He stopped, turning around. Samuel stood just a few meters away, his gaze sharper than the night itself. Daniel chuckled, though this time, there was a hint of unease in his smile. So you're choosing to end this with violence? Samuel didn't answer. He stepped forward. I taught you how to survive, Daniel continued, his tone trying to remain steady. You can kill me, but you'll never escape the darkness. You'll always be the thing I created. Samuel tilted his head slightly. No. You're wrong. Daniel frowned. What? I'm not something you created. Samuel reached into his coat and pulled out a small knife, but he didn't move closer. I used to think I had no choice but to become a monster like you. But I was wrong. Daniel stayed silent, but a flicker of unease passed through his eyes. There was a child, just like me once, Samuel continued, his voice unwavering. I saved him. I didn't turn my back like everyone else did. I gave him a chance that no one ever gave me. Daniel smirked. So you think that because of some nameless brat, you can change? That's ridiculous. No, Samuel replied simply. But it's a start. He stepped forward, gripping the knife tighter. Daniel instinctively backed away, his hand moving toward the gun holstered at his waist. He never got the chance to draw it. Samuel lunged, swift as the wind. Bam! Daniel took a solid punch to the jaw, staggering backward, nearly collapsing. He reached for his gun, but Samuel had already anticipated the move. A powerful kick sent the weapon flying. Daniel cursed, but he had no time to fight back. Samuel slammed him to the ground, one hand clamping around his throat. For the first time in his life, Daniel was no longer the stronger one. Do it. Daniel choked out, his voice breaking. You want to kill me, don't you? Then do it. Samuel raised the knife, and stopped. He looked at Daniel, the man who had once been a demon in his life, now small and weak, more pitiful than terrifying. And he realized something, Daniel wasn't scary anymore. Samuel let go. Daniel gasped for air, coughing, his eyes wide with disbelief. You. He panted. You're not going to kill me. Samuel stood up, stepping back. No, he replied. Death is too easy for you. Daniel stared at him, panic creeping into his eyes. Then what are you going to do? Samuel reached into his coat, pulled out a USB drive, and tossed it onto the ground beside Daniel. That contains all the evidence of your dirty dealings. It's already been sent to the police. Daniel's eyes widened in shock. You won't die, Samuel said, his voice low but unwavering. But you'll lose everything. Daniel lunged at him, but Samuel had already turned away. This time, it was Daniel who was left behind in the darkness. Samuel didn't look back. He didn't need to. He had closed the darkest chapter of his life without shedding more blood. He had chosen a different path. As he stepped out of the alley, the first light of dawn touched the horizon. He pulled out his phone, opened his contacts, and stopped at one name, Anna. After a moment's hesitation, he pressed call. Hello. Anna's voice came through. How's the boy? Samuel asked. He's doing well. Anna smiled. Yesterday, he asked me if you were coming back. Samuel was silent. Then, in a quiet voice, he said. Maybe. He hung up and looked up at the brightening sky. For the first time in his life, Samuel felt truly free. This story didn't end with revenge, it ended with a choice. A child once abandoned had decided not to let his past control him anymore. He had stepped out of the darkness, and for the first time, he saw the light. Samuel's journey teaches us that vengeance is not the only path. Despite betrayal and suffering, he had the power to choose between revenge and redemption. He realized that revenge does not bring peace, it only prolongs the pain. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is the strongest way to overcome the past. Only by letting go of hatred can one truly be free. Life is a choice to be consumed by darkness or to walk toward the light.